Welcome to Mayhem CEDH, where questionable decks meet questionable pilots. Whereas last week's games were over in 2 turns, this week's game is here to kick it down a notch. With that being said, let's check out the pod today. First, we have Noah on Winota Stacks, which seeks to land key stacks pieces and break parity with Winota's ability. Josh on Kinnan Find the Rock, a combo deck that tries to find Basalt Monolith with Kinnan in play to generate infinite mana and win with a combo. Tanner on Selvala Brostorm, a combo deck that seeks to slam big creatures, tap Selvala for big mana, and win with a big combo. And finally, Kaylin on Rashmi Draw Go, a control deck that uses Rashmi to turn all spells into cantrips, control the board, and win with a combo finish. And now, with each pilot in their respective corner of the screen, let us begin. And for those of you in the Ames area, stick around to find out how you can get 10% off your next Mayhem Ames purchase. Kaylin draws and plays an island for turn. He casts a Jeweled Lotus. He casts his commander, Rashmi, Eternity's Crafter. Kaylin passes. Noah draws and plays a Scalding Tarn. He cracks it, paying a life, and fetches up a Plateau onto the battlefield. He casts a Mana Crypt. He casts a Soul Ring. He casts a Turn 1 Rule of Law. The table groans and Noah passes. Josh draws and plays a Forest. He plays a Llanowar Elves. Josh passes. Tanner draws and plays a Snow-Covered Forest for turn. He plays a Boreal Druid. Tanner also passes. Kaylin draws and plays a Scalding Tarn. He casts Ponder. Rashmi triggers, revealing a Growth Spiral into his hand. He looks at the top 3, doesn't like what he sees, shuffles, and draws. Kaylin passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Noah loses his Mana Crypt trigger. He draws and plays a Snow-Covered Plains for turn. He casts a Recruiter of the Guard. It enters and Noah fetches up an Aven Mind Sensor into his hand. Noah passes. Josh draws and plays a Misty Rainforest. He casts Green Sun Zenith, where X equals 1. In response, Noah flashes in Aven Mind Sensor. In response, Josh cracks Misty Rainforest, paying a life and fetching up a tropical island onto the battlefield. Still in response, Kaylin cracks his Scalding Tarn, paying a life and fetching up a tropical island of his own onto the battlefield. He casts Mystical Tutor. Kaylin fetches up a Fierce Guardianship to the top of his library. Then, Aven Mind Sensor resolves. Josh looks at the top 4 cards, fails to find, and passes. Tanner draws and plays Boseiju, who endures. He casts his commander, Selvala, Heart of the Wilds. Tanner passes. Kaylin draws and plays a Wooded Foothills. He casts Carpet of Flowers. Rashmi triggers, revealing a Windswept Heath into his hand. Kaylin passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Noah loses his Mana Crypt trigger. He draws and plays a Battlefield Forge. He casts Mog Catcher. He moves to combat and attacks Josh with Mind Sensor and Recruiter. Josh takes it and Noah passes. Josh draws and plays a Forest. He casts his commander, Kinnan, Bonder Prodigy. Josh passes. Tanner draws and casts a Sheltering Ancient. It enters and Tanner draws through Selvala. He moves to combat and attacks Noah with Selvala. Noah takes the hit and Tanner passes. Kaylin draws and adds a blue through his carpet. He plays a Windswept Heath. He casts Growth Spiral. Rashmi triggers, revealing a Prismatic Vista into his hand. He draws and puts Prismatic Vista onto the battlefield. Kaylin passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Noah wins his Mana Crypt trigger. He draws and activates Mog Catcher. He fetches up a Goblin Rabble Master onto the battlefield. He casts his commander, Winota, Joiner of Forces. Noah moves to combat and creates a Goblin token through Rabble Master. He attacks Josh with the Goblin and Aven Mind Sensor. Winota triggers, and in response, Kaylin casts Pongify, targeting Aven Mind Sensor. Rashmi triggers, revealing a Forest into his hand. Mind Sensor is destroyed, and Noah creates a 3/3/8. Still in response, Kaylin cracks his fetches, paying 3 life and fetching up an Island, Breeding Pool into play untapped, paying 2 life, and a Forest. Then, Winota's triggers resolve. Noah looks at the top 6 and puts a Sanctum Prelate onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking Josh, naming 3 as it enters, and puts the rest on the bottom. Noah looks at the top 6 again and fails to find, putting all 6 to the bottom. Josh blocks the Goblin token, takes the rest, and Noah passes. Josh draws and plays a Polluted Delta. He plays a Mox Opal. Josh passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Tanner pays for his Sheltering Ancient, putting a +1/+1 counter on Josh's Llanowar Elves. He draws and plays a Makokoro, Center of the Sea. He activates Selvala to help cast Kogla the Titaning. It enters and fights Winota, and Tanner draws through Selvala. Tanner moves to combat and attacks Noah with the Ancient. Noah takes the hit, and Tanner passes. At the end of Tanner's turn, Kaylin casts Impulse. Rashmi triggers, revealing a Mana Crypt into his hand. He looks at the top 4, puts 1 into his hand, and the rest on the bottom. The turn moves to Kaylin. Kaylin draws and adds a blue through his carpet. He plays a Forest for turn. He casts a Merchant Scroll. Rashmi triggers, revealing a Baral, Chief of Compliance, into his hand. Kaylin fetches up a Force of Will into his hand and shuffles. Kaylin passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Noah loses his Mana Crypt trigger. He draws and recasts his commander, Winota, Joiner of Forces. In response, Kalen casts Unsubstantiate, targeting Winota. Rashmi triggers, revealing a Gitaxian Probe into his hand. Winota is bounced, and Noah moves to combat, creating a 1/1 Goblin attacking Josh. Josh blocks with Llanowar Elves, and Noah passes. At the end of Noah's turn, Josh cracks his Polluted Delta, paying a life and fetching up an island onto the battlefield. The turn moves to Josh. Josh draws and plays a Talisman of Curiosity. Josh passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Tanner pays for his Ancient, putting 2 +1/+1 counters on Llanowar Elves. He draws and plays a Gemstone Caverns. He moves to combat and attacks Noah with Kogla. Kogla triggers, destroying Rule of Law. Noah chumps with Prelate, and in his second main phase, Tanner casts a Mana Crypt. He casts a Crow Mox, imprinting Scale Up. He casts Green Sun Zenith, where X equals 2. In response, Kalen casts Fierce Guardianship. Rashmi triggers, revealing a Waterlogged Grove into his hand. Zenith is countered, and Tanner follows it up with a Fyndhorn Elves. He casts an Elvish Mystic and passes. Kalen draws and adds 2 blue through his carpet. He plays a Waterlogged Grove. He casts Baral, Chief of Compliance. Rashmi triggers, revealing and casting a Thought Scour, targeting himself. He mills 2 and draws. He casts Sylvan Library. Kalen passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Noah loses his Mana Crypt trigger. He draws and plays a Needle Verge Pathway. He casts Dockside Extortionist. It enters and Noah creates 6 treasure tokens. He plays a Remorseful Cleric. He recasts his commander, Winota, Joiner of Forces. He activates Mogcatcher, fetching up a Goblin Crater Maker onto the battlefield. He moves to combat and creates a Goblin token through Rabblemaster, attacking Josh with Rabblemaster in the token and Kalen with the Ape token. Winota triggers 3 times. Noah looks at the top 6 3 times, finding a Dranith Magistrate tapped and attacking Tanner, Cathar Commando tapped and attacking Tanner, and Thalia Guardian of Thraben tapped and attacking Kalen. Josh blocks the Goblin token and Rabblemaster with Llanowar and Kinnan, Tanner takes the hit, and Kalen blocks Thalia with Baral, and takes the hit from the Ape. In his second main phase, Noah casts Hope of Gariper. Feeling strong, Noah passes. At the end of Noah's turn, Josh taps his permanents and casts Dramatic Reversal. In response, Noah sacrifices Goblin Crater Maker, dealing 2 to Kinnan, who goes to the command zone. Dramatic Reversal resolves, untapping all of Josh's non-land permanents. And still at the end step, Kalen delves to cast Dig Through Time. Rashmi triggers, revealing and casting a Soul Ring. He looks at the top 7, puts 2 into his hand, and the rest on the bottom. The turn moves to Josh. Josh draws and plays a Gemstone Caverns. He plays a Memory Jar. In response, Tanner activates Makokoro and everyone draws. Josh passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Tanner wins his Mana Crypt trigger and pays for his Ancient, putting 3 +1/+1 counters on Baral. He moves to combat and attacks Noah with Kogla and Josh with Ancient. Kogla triggers, destroying Hope of Gariper. Noah chumps with Recruiter and Josh takes the hit. In his second main phase, Tanner casts Manglehorn. It enters, targeting Memory Jar. In response, Josh cracks Memory Jar, with each player setting their hand aside face down into exile and drawing 7 new cards. He casts an Allosaurus Shepherd. He casts Veil of Summer. In response, Kalen casts Resculpt, targeting Allosaurus Shepherd. Rashmi triggers, revealing a Season's Past into his hand. Allosaurus Shepherd is exiled, Tanner creates a 4/4 Elemental, and Veil of Summer resolves, drawing him a card. He plays a Forest. He casts a Great Oak Guardian. It enters and untaps all of Tanner's creatures, giving them +2/+2. He casts Woodland Bellower. It enters and Tanner fetches up a Hyrax Tower Scout onto the battlefield, untapping Selvala. With this, Tanner presents a loop of bouncing Hyrax to hand with Kogla and recasting with mana from Selvala, untapping Selvala, creating infinite mana. He casts Regal Force. It enters and Tanner draws 11 cards. He casts Soul's Majesty, targeting Kogla, drawing 9 cards. He casts Rishkar's Expertise, drawing 9 cards and casting Momentous Fall for free, sacrificing Woodland Bellower, drawing 6 and gaining 5 life. He casts Return of the Wild Speaker, drawing 9 more cards. He casts Beast Within, destroying Kalen's Tropical Island and giving Kalen a 3/3 Beast token. He casts Eternal Witness, targeting Beast Within. In response, Noah sacrifices Remorseful Cleric, targeting Tanner. In response, Tanner flashes in Endurance, targeting himself. Tanner puts his graveyard on the bottom of his library, Cleric exiles his graveyard, and Eternal Witness fizzles. Tanner casts Staff of Domination. Tanner presents another loop with Staff to draw his entire deck. Tanner casts Beast Within, targeting Kalen's Island. In response, Noah sacrifices Cathar Commando, destroying Staff of Domination. Despite this, Tanner presents a loop of using Beast Within, combined with looping Eternal Witness through Kogla, to destroy each player's permanents, giving them all 3/3 Beast tokens. With Teamer Sabretooth able to loop Kogla's Fight ETB, the table, no longer with any permanents, sees the writing on the wall, and Tanner wins the game. For those of you in the Ames area who stuck around, come to Mayhem Comics in Ames this week and ask for the YouTube discount. You'll be asked the question, who won? Answer correctly and get 10% off your purchase. Thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe to catch future videos, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.